Hey everyone, I wanted to pick up where I left off on section 3 and give some added time to this last slide I think is really important for this section and for this course as a whole. And this slide focuses on subcultures and norms, but also translates to deviance. We have a whole class on deviant behavior through our level. Class is important and fascinating and interesting and fun. We get to talk about deviant behavior for a whole semester. So I highly encourage you to take that at some point if you can. But to zoom in on these terms and what they mean, subcultures, we're very familiar with the term. We hear it a lot. But in this class, we want to think of it in terms of how a subculture exists within larger culture, in that it is a group within the larger culture, but it is distinguishable in some way. Some of the most famous examples exist around music communities and how music communities dress in certain ways, wear their hair in certain ways, listen to certain music, gather at certain events that distinguish them and make them unique from the larger culture. In fact, a lot of music cultures tend to want to be or strive to be counter to the overall culture. And the examples I give in the lecture notes and talk about on the slides often revolve the punk rock music communities, but they're not the only ones you can think of in terms of a subculture. Now, with all of this, you have to understand social norms. And norms exist in our everyday life. They guide our everyday behavior. Think of them as generally held upon or agreed upon social rules. Now, social norms are socially constructed. What that is absolutely essential for this section and throughout this course. We talk a lot about social constructions, and for norms, it's dealing with the reality that the social rules that guide so much of our daily life and behavior were made up. They're socially constructed, so they can change. They can change in 10 years from now. They can change next year. The norms may look differently in another culture, in another country, another state, another university, but this stuff is socially relative, and that's important because deviant behavior is the violation of social norms. And if social norms are socially constructed, then a la deviance is also socially constructed. And that's really, really important. Now, we still try to enforce norms, or we try to enforce norms through sanctions. And what that means is if you violate a social norm, usually what follows is some type of sanction. Now, in theory, sanctions are harsher for the more serious of a rule that's being violated. For example, some of the most serious norms, or theoretically, some of the most serious norms in a society are actually put into law, basically making the statement that we consider this rule so important and so serious that if you violate it, we can actually use the legal system or criminal justice system to sanction you and to punish you for violating that social norm. Now, within that, we want to think of these norms as mores. In terms of mores, are a type of norm that is usually connected to some kind of strong moral component, and the sanctions or the violating that a more is considered more serious than other types of norms, and thus the sanctions that come with those violations tend to be more serious as well. Example of this would be assault. It is a generally agreed upon rule that you should not physically harm someone else. And we consider that a important enough and a serious enough norm that if you violate it, you can be legally charged and you can feel the brunt of the criminal justice system that comes with that because you have committed an assault. Now, with these mores, it's important to recognize that all this that I'm telling you is in theory, right? Because the idea that, that the punishment always fits the crime. Well, we have countless upon countless examples of criminology where that's not really the case. For example, we have spent decades in this country socially constructing rules and laws around drugs that are bringing much harsher sanctions to them than crimes like white-collar crimes, despite white-collar crimes having significant impact on people's lives, sometimes leading to the dismantling of whole fundamental elements of our economy. But the sanctions that often come with these white-collar crimes are not as harsh as the sanctions that come with a lot of what would generally be considered less serious crimes, like drug crimes or other victimless crimes. Now, The other type of norm that's important to recognize are folkways. And these are these everyday norms where they don't really, they're social rules. They don't really have a strong connection to any kind of ethical guideline or ethical or moral component. So the sanctions for them tend to be more mild. For example, we have a lot of social norms around, hey, there's a certain distance that you should be away from me when you talk to me, right? But that we can easily see how that is socially constructed and socially relative when you look and you go into another culture and the norm is not the same. For example, you've probably heard somebody refer to somebody else before, oh, they're a close talker. What they're saying is they tend to violate the generally agreed upon social rules that you should be X amount of distance away when speaking to someone else. Now, the sanction for this, for being a quote unquote close talker, obviously is not going to be anything serious. Maybe somebody just takes a step back. Maybe somebody makes comments about you behind your back, kind of the example I just gave. But you're not looking at any kind of harsh sanctions. And so often when we think of deviance and norms, we think of how harsh is the sanction and connect that to, is that norm, the norm that was violated, a folkway or a moray. Now, a great example right now to see how these norms are socially relative is to look at how things are changing during the COVID-19 pandemic, especially around that close talking example. We now not only we have health guidelines around we should be 6 feet or more apart currently, but some states are going as far to try to mandate it in certain establishments and certain businesses. And what we're seeing is, we've always kind of had these norms and general rules around you should be X feet away from somebody, but those are changing because of the health dynamics of today, which is just a reflection of this stuff is socially constructed, so it can change. So being considered deviant for the distance upon which, or the distance from which you talk to somebody, is going to look different now than it did 6 months ago, and possibly look different 6 months from now, because who knows what the health landscape is going to look like. Now, as I mentioned before, deviance is something I find extremely fascinating and important. It's also really, really important as we work through this course and reflect back on deviance that we always think about the power dynamics that are built into that, into understanding who creates the rules, who determines which rules are serious enough to codify or put into law, who has control of the punishment systems and how are those punishments being levied. We're going to dig into that a lot throughout the semester, but it's important you understand the definitions of these fundamental concepts before you can move in to doing more thorough analysis through kind of these power dynamic lenses. Now, the blog activity for this section is, when we do this class in person, I'll be honest, it's my favorite. It's fun to see you all kind of reflect back on a culture in which you exist currently and think through what makes you different from other campus cultures or even the larger community that you're in. So for this, you're going to kind of force yourself to think through that. Think through what are norms that exist on campus at CNU that maybe don't exist on other campuses or don't exist when you take a step off this campus and move into the Hampton Roads community. So within each of those norms, ask yourself, would I consider this a folkway or a moray when on campus? How serious of a norm is this, and how serious is the sanction that comes with it? Because I want you to go through each of the 6 norms you come up with and think of whether something you could do to violate this norm and thus become a deviant on CNU's campus, and then what kind of sanctions would follow. And you can think through like how maybe violating the honor code has sanctions that are harsher than not following guidelines and how to walk through the dining hall. There's a lot of norms embedded in these 2 examples. However, the sanctions are going to look very different, which can help you further learn and apply these concepts of norms, mores, folkways, and sanctions. I really hope you enjoy this activity. I really look forward to seeing what you respond to on the blog, and make sure you look at your classmates' responses as you all can have a little bit of a virtual classroom community as you all reflect back on the campus culture at CNU and how it's unique in terms of its norms, its deviance, and its sanctions. All right, everybody, enjoy. Thank you.